Before the world knew chaos, before violence filled the earth, a decision was made in the heavenly realm that would alter the destiny of humanity forever. It began not with mortals, but with beings of light, angels who stood in the presence of the Most High, who witnessed creation unfold from the very beginning. These were the Watchers, celestial sentinels assigned to observe humanity without interference, to guard the boundaries between heaven and earth. Yet somewhere in the unfolding of time, a desire awakened among them that should never have stirred. The ancient Book of Enoch, preserved for centuries and discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls, records what happened next with startling clarity. 200 Watchers, led by their chief Semyaza, gathered on the summit of Mount Hermon, a place whose very name means the forbidden place or devoted to destruction. There, beneath the stars they once commanded, these celestial beings entered into a solemn pact. They knew what they were about to do was forbidden. They understood the weight of their transgression. And so they bound themselves with mutual oaths, each one swearing to follow through, so that no single angel would bear the guilt alone. Semyaza spoke to them with words that would echo through eternity. I fear you will not agree to this deed, and I alone shall pay the penalty for a great sin. But the others answered with one voice, binding themselves together in rebellion. Among them were Azazel, Arakiel, Ramiel, Kokabeel, Tamiel, Ramiel, Danel, Shazakiel, Barakiel, Asael, Armoros, and Bat Ariel, names recorded as a warning to all generations. These were not minor spirits or lesser beings. These were princes of heaven, angels of high rank and authority. And then, in an act that violated every divine ordinance, they descended. They took on physical form, abandoning their incorporeal nature to walk among humanity. They saw the daughters of men, found them beautiful, and took them as wives, crossing a boundary that was never meant to be crossed. The heavenly had merged with the earthly. The spiritual had contaminated the physical. And from this forbidden union, something unprecedented would be born. The Watchers did not simply take human wives and disappear into quiet domesticity. Their corruption of humanity went far deeper, far more systematically than mere physical transgression. They began to teach mortals knowledge that was never meant for human minds, secrets that belonged exclusively to the celestial realm, wisdom that would accelerate humanity's descent into darkness at a terrifying pace. Azazel, one of the most prominent leaders among the fallen angels, taught men the art of warfare with devastating precision. He showed them how to forge swords, knives, shields, and breastplates, how to craft instruments of death with metals drawn from the earth. Before this, conflicts were settled with stones and wooden clubs. Now, humanity possessed the means for organized slaughter. The Book of Enoch records that Azazel revealed all the metals of the earth and the art of working them, transforming human civilization into an engine of violence. But the corruption spread beyond weaponry. Other Watchers taught different forbidden arts, each one unraveling another thread of divine order. Arakiel taught the signs of the earth, the subtle movements that could predict natural disasters. Barakiel taught astrology, showing humanity how to read the stars not for wonder, but for divination and manipulation. Kokabeel revealed the constellations and their supposed influences over human fate. Shazakiel taught the knowledge of clouds and weather patterns. Tamiel unveiled astrology's darkest applications, while Asael taught the illusions of cosmetics and the deceptive arts of beautification. Women learned to enhance their appearance with antimony for the eyes, precious stones, and colored dyes, techniques designed not for simple adornment but for seduction and manipulation. Men learned enchantments, root cutting for potions, and the resolution of curses. Armoros taught the resolving of enchantments. Semyaza himself taught sorcery and the cutting of roots for magical purposes. What had been a world of relative innocence became a civilization steeped in darkness. Violence erupted across every nation. Sorcery became commonplace. Humanity, now armed with celestial knowledge but lacking celestial wisdom, plunged into chaos. The earth cried out under the weight of bloodshed and corruption, and the foundations of creation began to crack. From the unions between the Watchers and human women came beings that should never have existed, creatures who belonged fully to neither heaven nor earth. These were the Nephilim, hybrid offspring whose very existence was an abomination against the natural order. The Book of Enoch describes them with a mixture of awe and horror, giants of enormous stature, 3,000 cubits in height according to some traditions, though other ancient texts suggest varying but always extraordinary dimensions. These were not merely tall humans. They were something altogether different. The Nephilim grew rapidly, consuming resources at an alarming rate. Their appetites were insatiable, far exceeding anything humanity could sustain. The ancient text records that they consumed all the acquisitions of men, devouring the harvests, the livestock, everything that human labor had produced. When humanity could no longer feed them, the giants turned against their human neighbors. They began to devour mankind itself. And when even that was not enough, they turned on one another, giant consuming giant, in an orgy of violence that defied comprehension. These beings were not weak or frail despite their unnatural origins. On the contrary, they possessed supernatural strength and vigor. They became mighty warriors, feared across every land, their names spoken in whispers. They were the Gibberim, the mighty men mentioned in Genesis 6, the men of renown whose fame spread across the ancient world. But their renown came not from virtue or heroism, but from terror and domination. The Book of Jubilees describes how violence and corruption became universal under their influence. And lawlessness increased on the earth, and all flesh corrupted its way, alike men and cattle and beasts and birds and everything that walks on the earth. The Nephilim taught humanity new forms of cruelty, new methods of oppression. They established themselves as kings and tyrants, ruling through fear and overwhelming force. Their hybrid nature meant they carried powers beyond human capability but were trapped in physical bodies subject to earthly limitations. This contradiction made them volatile, angry, constantly unsatisfied. They could not return to the heavenly realm their fathers had abandoned, nor could they fully integrate into human society. They existed in a perpetual state of spiritual homelessness, and they made the world suffer for it. The earth groaned under their weight, and heaven watched in grief as creation spiraled toward total collapse. The corruption did not go unnoticed by heaven. While the watchers reveled in their earthly pleasures and the Nephilim spread violence across every continent, the archangels who had remained faithful observed with growing alarm. Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Ariel, the four great princes who stood before the throne of God, witnessed humanity's cries ascending like smoke from a burning world. The Book of Enoch records that they saw much blood being shed upon the earth, and all lawlessness being wrought upon the earth. The souls of the slain cried out from the ground, their voices reaching the heavenly realm with desperate pleas, "Bring our cause before the Most High." The corruption was complete. Humanity had been led astray by forbidden knowledge. The Nephilim consumed everything in their path. The earth itself was defiled. And the faithful angels knew that something had to be done, that divine intervention was not merely justified but absolutely necessary. The four archangels presented themselves before the Ancient of Days, laying out the full scope of the catastrophe. They reported how Azazel had taught warfare and violence, how Semyaza had taught sorcery and enchantments, how the entire order of creation had been subverted by the Watchers' rebellion. They described the Nephilim's atrocities, the bloodshed, the cannibalism, the absolute devastation of everything good and pure. And the Most High responded with a decree that would reshape the world. To Raphael, he commanded, "Bind Azazel hand and foot, and cast him into the darkness. Make an opening in the desert which is in Dudiel, and cast him there. Place upon him rough and jagged rocks, and cover him with darkness. Let him abide there forever, and cover his face that he may not see light. And on the day of the great judgment, he shall be cast into the fire." To Michael, the command was equally severe, "Go and bind Semyaza and his associates who have united themselves with women. Bind them beneath the hills of the earth for 70 generations, until the day of their judgment and consummation, until the judgment that is forever and ever is consummated." But judgment would not fall on the Watchers alone. The entire earth had become corrupted beyond redemption. The decree was final: a flood would come, waters would rise above the highest mountains, and all flesh would be destroyed. Only a remnant would survive, a single family through whom humanity would begin again. The Watchers would be bound in darkness, imprisoned until the final judgment, and their offspring, the Nephilim, would be wiped from existence. The judgment began swiftly and without mercy. Raphael descended to the desert of Dudiel, where Azazel, the chief teacher of violence and warfare, awaited his fate. The archangel bound him hand and foot with chains that could not be broken, not by any force the fallen angel possessed. Then Raphael cast him into a pit, covering him with rough and jagged rocks, sealing him in absolute darkness. No light would touch him. No voice would reach him. He would remain there, imprisoned in solitude, until the day of final judgment when he would be thrown into eternal fire. The other Watchers met similar fates. Michael, the great prince and commander of heaven's armies, went forth to bind Semyaza and his associates. One by one, the rebellious angels were seized, their physical forms stripped away, their essence confined to pits of darkness deep beneath the earth. The Book of Enoch describes these prisons as places of total isolation, where the fallen angels would remain until the day of the Great Judgment. 70 generations would pass before they would even be brought forth to face their final condemnation. The New Testament echoes this ancient account with striking precision. 2 Peter 2 verse 4 states that God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment. Jude 6 reinforces this, describing the angels who did not stay within their own position of authority, but left their proper dwelling, and how God has kept them in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. But before the waters came, the Nephilim faced their own destruction. According to ancient Jewish writings, God commanded the archangels to set the giants against one another. The Nephilim, already prone to violence, turned on each other in savage warfare. Giant slew giant. Brothers fought brothers. The creatures who had terrorized humanity now tore each other apart, and the earth ran red with their blood. Then came the flood. The fountains of the great deep burst forth. The windows of heaven opened. Rain fell for 40 days and 40 nights, and the waters rose higher and higher, covering the hills, submerging the mountains, erasing every trace of the corrupted world. All flesh perished. The Nephilim drowned in the depths. Humanity was reduced to 8 souls in an ark. The watchers remained bound in their dark prisons, unable to help their offspring, unable to escape their own judgment. When the waters finally receded, the world had been cleansed. Creation was given a second chance. The hybrid abominations were gone. The fallen angels were imprisoned. It seemed that the rebellion had been crushed completely, that the boundary between heaven and earth had been permanently restored. Yet one haunting question remained, a mystery that would surface again in the pages of Scripture. If the Nephilim were completely destroyed by the flood, if the watchers were bound in eternal darkness, if the corruption had been utterly erased from the earth, then how do we explain what happened next? Centuries after the waters receded, giants walked the earth again. They appeared in Canaan, in Bashan, in the territories of the Moabites and Ammonites. They established kingdoms, built fortified cities, and struck terror into the hearts of those who encountered them. Moses sent 12 spies into Canaan, and they returned with reports that echoed the pre-flood world. We saw the Nephilim there, the descendants of Anak, who come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. The Hebrew text uses the exact same word, Nephilim. Not merely tall men, but the same category of beings that had been destroyed by the flood. King Og of Bashan, one of the last of the Rephaim, stood 13 feet tall with shoulders spanning more than 7 feet. His bed, made of iron, was displayed as a monument to his colossal size. The Anakim, descendants of Anak, dominated the hill country with such overwhelming presence that an entire generation of Israelites refused to enter the promised land out of sheer terror. Even in the time of King David, giants like Goliath and his brothers still roamed the valleys, wielding weapons no ordinary human could lift. So how did they return? Ancient scholars have proposed several explanations, each attempting to solve this profound mystery. Some suggest that certain watchers escaped the initial judgment, that not all 200 were bound, and that these remaining angels repeated the transgression after the flood, once again taking human wives and producing hybrid offspring. This would explain the phrase in Genesis 6 verse 4, and also afterward, suggesting the phenomenon occurred both before and after the deluge. Others point to the possibility that the binding of the watchers happened in stages, that some angels continued their rebellion until a later judgment forced God to imprison them permanently. This would align with the New Testament references to angels being cast into darkness, events that some scholars believe occurred after the flood rather than before it. A third interpretation suggests that somehow, through means not fully explained in Scripture, the genetic corruption introduced by the watchers survived the flood through one of the lines preserved on the ark. This controversial view attempts to explain the reappearance without requiring a second angelic incursion, though it raises as many questions as it answers. What remains undeniable is that the giants returned. The biblical record is explicit and repeated. From the time of Abraham through the conquest of Canaan, throughout the period of the Judges, and even into the reign of King David, these extraordinary beings continued to exist, shaping history, inspiring terror, and leaving an indelible mark on the ancient world. The mystery of the Watchers does not end with their binding. It echoes forward through centuries, leaving us to wrestle with profound questions about the nature of rebellion, the persistence of corruption, and the lengths to which fallen beings will go to corrupt God's creation. Which explanation resonates most with you? Share your thoughts. Your perspective matters in unraveling one of Scripture's most enduring mysteries.